conference is now being recorded.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the New York ASBO webinar, Long Range Financial Planning. The presenters for today's program are Stephen Van Hoosen, Director of Government Relations and Professional Development at New York ASBO, and Kurt Yeager, Assistant Superintendent at the Saratoga Springs City School District. My name is Matthew Darius. I am the Senior Staff Associate for Professional Development at New York ASBO, and I will be moderating the webinar today. Operator assistance is available anytime during this conference by pressing £. A Q&A session will follow this presentation. You may send chat questions at any time during the presentation using the chat window indicated by a speech bubble icon located to the right of the presentation. I will now turn the call over to our first speaker, Steve Van Hoosen. Please begin.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Let me introduce myself a little bit more. Again, I am Steve Van Hoosen. I'm the Director of Government Relations and Professional Support Services here with New York State ASBO. And I'm lucky enough to be joined by Kurt Yeager, who is the Assistant Superintendent for Business at the Saratoga Springs City School District. And the topic of long-range planning is one that we've presented in a variety of different formats. Going back to last year, recognizing the instability of revenues, cost drivers, and certain circumstances that districts found themselves in politically and fiscally, that the ability to conduct a long-range planning process and to bring in the components of a cooperative community, a cooperative board, a strong team was essential and more important now than ever. We have ASBO has presented at conferences from the Council of School Superintendents to New York State school boards a year ago, and we've provided a couple of these types of programs over the last year or so, and we will continue to do that. Like I said before, I'm lucky enough to have Kurt sitting next to me, who is the business official, the Assistant Superintendent at Saratoga, who's worked in several different school districts of a variety of different sizes. He is a certified school business official. He's got an MBA from Adelphi University. He's a certified public accountant, and like I said, has a wealth of experience as far as trying to put practical long-range planning processes into place in school districts that actually make a difference. Kurt is going to be running through the presentation that you see in front of you, and he's got a real nice picture there of Saratoga's homecoming. I hope you all can see that, and I think that's actually a good place to start, because that, to me, reminds me of what this is all about. It's trying to provide a plan for continuing the educational process and meeting the goals of the school districts. We're going to run through the slides. Please use the chat window, ask some questions along the way. We'll either incorporate the process, as I will as I interject certain comments along the way, or you can certainly wait until the questions and answers when you can dial in, and Matthew will remind you how to do that when we get to that part. So, again, thank you for joining us, and please use the chat window as you need to. And Kurt, if you all set?
I certainly am.
Okay.
Steve, thank you for asking me to join you. It's a pleasure to be here today. As I try to pull together some thoughts on long-range planning, the common theme that came to my mind is one of managing change. It seems to be ultimately what the goal of all the planning has to be, and the change comes in so many different ways. We have a federal government that certainly is facing challenges and change, a state government that's facing changes, our local economies are facing changes, our colleagues are facing changes, pressures with cut scores and no child left behind and converting 2s to 3s and 3s and 4s. So I think all of this has a goal of how do we successfully manage change. We thought we would set up the program kind of a Q&A, a scripted Q&A to go through some of the aspects we'd like to share. I'd like to talk about uncertainty. Like to really talk about shared experiences. Certainly there's no one right way to do things. Largely, what we'll be sharing today is a model that is working currently in our district. It's not perfect. Certainly went through a number of bad models before we got to this model, but perhaps somewhere along the line there'll be some things that you can take back to your district. You may want to try to think, sorting out all these topics, 2 or 3 things that are really worthwhile and important that you can implement after this webinar. When we think about long-range planning, it's a very comprehensive topic. Most of this discussion is really meant to be talking about the multi-year financial plan. But that plan really can't be done in isolation. Certainly, we all have to have an awareness of what's going on in the programs in our schools. If there was not a program, there wouldn't be a need for a financial plan to support it. So I think it's easy to forget in the business office that the main business, keeping the main thing is educating the kids in our community. Looking at some of the things that we're looking at as a district in terms of program planning is how do we increase our graduation rates? How do we decrease course failures? What courses are kids failing? Why are they failing those courses? What are we going to do about it? How are we going to reallocate resources? Certain subgroups that are not performing well, how do we improve that? How do we improve literacy? If kids can't read, they can't do well in other areas. If kids are engaged, they do better in their studies. How are we going to get them engaged? Different places may have different issues when it comes to enrollment. If you're in a capital district area and AMD is moving in, you may be seriously contemplating how we're going to support these kids. Other communities may have declining enrollments. Okay, certainly a key part of any plan is to have an enrollment forecast, to know the number of sections that you're going to need. Are you adding sections? Are you decreasing sections?
Yeah, I think this is the enrollment plan is one of the areas that it gets done periodically, and one of the things that, at least at the association level, that we find is that these plans, almost in some cases like long-range plans, they get done in fits and starts. But the enrollment planning and knowing what's going on with enrollments is not only just about doing the cohort survival method and understanding what your numbers look like based on previous year's history and maybe a few pieces of data. But when you look at the new industry piece is critical here, is to understand what's going on in your community, what's available, what's being discussed. It's really things that when we talk about the team and who's involved in getting buy-in to talking about what's realistic for the community and the plan, that keeping that enrollment planning process going over time and not keeping it as a static document that doesn't fit in with a longer plan is very important.
Certainly looking at a longer-term staffing plan, having a clear understanding of what your staffing pattern has been over the years, what direction you're going in. Is it going to change because of the way you're going to deliver instruction? Are you going to decrease the number of reading specialists, for example, do more inclusion programming? Those aspects of what you need to staff up for really need to be tied to what your program is. Certainly, we all have to do a 5-year facilities plan. We have to look at our capacity, our energy, how we're using our space. What used to work a long time ago may not work anymore. Maybe our economy is changing some, that we really have to look at 5-year cyclical, smaller projects. Seems to be a lot fewer larger projects going on throughout the state, but certainly the same level of deterioration will occur. We have to refocus more toward a maintenance mode. Certainly, we have to look at the resources it's going to take. So all of those things, somehow or other, have to be accomplished and be considered in the multi-year forecast, because that's really what the forecast is for. How are you going to deliver this program to your students and your residents?
Yeah, and I think that the bottom piece here on that last bullet that you see, the integration of plans, because in and of themselves, these can all be looked at as standalone and looked at in isolation. But unless that you have the team that's looking at all these types of things to achieve that goal of what your program plans are, is a real, a component of how you figure out how to integrate them together. And I don't want to miss that one point on that slide.
Certainly, we're dealing with change. That was really why I changed the title of the presentation to change. We even look at the leadership of the state. I went back to a couple of years' forecasts, and at that time it was Governor Spitzer. Now it's Governor Patterson. Soon it's going to be somebody else. Each of those potential candidates has a platform that at this point appears to have significant changes to us. I don't know, Steve,
yeah,
you'd like to elaborate on some of that?
Yeah, I can do a little bit of speculation here, at least as far as where we may end up with a plan. Just as far as the association is concerned, we've advocated ever since the gentleman here in your picture talked about tax caps as to why that, particularly in how they were introduced as part of his plan, would be difficult for districts to deal with, and why tax caps haven't worked in other places, and the construction of these things can be problematic. Just in terms of an up-to-date issue related to this, you can see here that it did start with Governor Spitzer. Governor Patterson had jumped on the bandwagon as far as tax caps, and now at least the leading candidate has put forth his plan, which you probably have seen or at least heard him talk about, Andrew Cuomo, with a 2% property tax cap, which includes overrides. His also includes the spending cap and some review of mandates. Right now, we've seen this past legislative session a passage within the Senate late in their session as they were trying to wrap up the never-ending budget process of passing a 4% property tax cap applied to the levy. And from what we understand is that the Cuomo camp, who's is increasing his lead in the polls, and we got 2 weeks to find out if that's going to be in fact the case, where he's leaning toward a bottom line in terms of what the property tax levy increases would be. More than likely, it would be a 4% with very few types of exemptions in that. That is closer to what the Senate passed, and the types of exemptions that we've been advocating for are more like what we see in New Jersey. But there is some consensus right now in terms of the campaigns of Cuomo and the Senate to come to grips on the 4% tax caps, or a 4% tax cap on the levy, with few, if any, exemptions, with exception of capital and some debt service types of things. So, rapidly changing. We will find out in a couple of weeks if that's the person that we're going to have as the leader of the state. But clearly, the example here is that in terms of doing your financial plan and how you're going to look at your sources of revenues, we are in a drastically changing environment right now.
Our next slide talks about things that you're all familiar with. Some state aid reduction that's occurred already, potential of another mid-year state aid reduction, reductions to STAR money, funding cliffs, race to the top. I should have put the money in perhaps smaller print. Unsettled labor contracts, rising health care costs. So what does all of this have to do with long-range planning? I think what it says is that things are changing. We're no longer in an environment where you can develop 1,000 pages of detail and have a tremendous long-range forecast and then put it on the shelf and think everything's taken care of. the world changes quickly, the plans have to change quickly, and you have to be set up to be able to do that. Certainly, there's no one right way to do it, and this is not coming. These slides are not coming from a textbook. They're simply coming from experience. Each district has a culture, and you have to operate within the culture of your district. What works, what forms people are comfortable in. I'll share a little bit about the model that we use and why I think it's been successful. Certainly, there's more than one model. Going back well before 2005, when the Comptroller's Office established legislation requiring an audit committee, our district had formed what we call a finance committee. And the players in the finance committee are important because they need to bring something to the table, and they really need to bring something away from the table. What we've used in our team is certainly the superintendent of schools, the business office, and the business office in our district really becomes the facilitator of those meetings in terms of setting up agenda topics and areas of discussion and consideration. Certainly want the Board of Education to be part of it. Some people feel that they should have other members of the public involved. Some people feel that the Boards of Education people have been vetted through a process, a public process. They've made a commitment to stay with it, and that they make good representatives of the public in and of their standing as a board member. There's a need for other administrators. I think program people, curriculum people need to understand the big picture of where the district is, what they can do, what they can't do. Certainly, certain times we will bring in other professionals. Recently, in this past year, we did a major refinancing of some of our bonds. For a case like that, we would bring in fiscal advisors to talk about it, to explain the modeling, to talk about timing. Might bring in bond counsel. What we've found is that our committee work was much more successful when the committee members had a longer-term commitment. We live in a very complicated, we run a very complicated business, and it's understandable that it takes people time to understand those complexities, and we try to accomplish that in these meetings. We've also found that there's considerable value in people to seeing a full cycle, to understand what a forecast is, to understand really pulling together the budget, to have bought into the budget, and then actually after the fact to see the audit and to actually, not just from a control point of view, but to see the actual audit financial statements as a way to assess, okay, this is how we ended the year, where did we think we were going to end the year, where do we want to end the year. We actually have our audit committee as a subcommittee of the board members who are on the finance committee. We found it very helpful for people to be fully aware of this and to understand the full cycle when they're going through this. Certainly, nothing's perfect, and we always need to be assessing the effectiveness of a team, what's working, what's not working. You can increase communication by having a larger group. You can decrease efficiency by having a larger group. And certainly you have personalities to meld together as well. I was kidding around with Steve before. Sometimes it's like planning a reception as to who's going to sit next to who. There's an art to it.
Yeah, I think one of the things that Kurt and I have also talked about here as we looked at this and how we've presented this, in the past is when you assemble this team together and there is a culture to it, and as we talk a little bit about getting into some trust issues, is it's more than likely that the time that you're going to be most effective is trying to have these committee meetings or as functions of the whole at 11:30 at night, on a Tuesday. That when you bring these other groups in, particularly other administrators or part of the whether it's the audit committee that functions as a subgroup of the finance committee, to bring them in at a point in time where it makes some sense to get some productive conversation and agreement going on some of these things, and to be able to share information. We've talked to some districts as they try to put these discussions all at board meetings. And maybe bring in some people to have some of these discussions about what their assumptions are and start putting their forecast together. And it's rarely an effective team that comes out of some of those meetings. So when you start understanding how to bring in the other administrators, different members of the public, who they need to hear from, whether it's other financial advisors and whatnot, is to keep that type of things in consideration is how can we be most effective and who are we communicating with as this process goes along.
I shared with Steve that our committee prefers to meet at 8 o'clock in the morning or even a 7:30 meeting depending on people's work schedule. Our experience is that there's more done from 7:30 to 8:30 than there might be from 8 o'clock at night till 12 o'clock at night. Certainly a good cup of coffee and an early start seems to go a long ways. Steve and I shared notes before putting this presentation together because Steve has done some other presentations, and one of the things I thought was very important to talk about was the building of trust and confidence, something that Steve had some great slides in another presentation. And I would like to just share a few thoughts on that topic. It's hard to get a team, in my experience, working together without trust and confidence. And I reflected on the issue that it's a problem, but how do people go about solving it? I don't know all the answers to that, but I can share some insights thinking about it. Certainly, it helps to have a track record. And it takes time to build a track record. You can't walk in with it. In our case, where the audit committee is part of the finance committee and really function as a budget committee, if you have clean audits, which take a lot of work, it does enhance confidence. People are hearing from other people that things are under control, that they're getting accurate numbers during the year. Certainly, if the forecasts are reasonably accurate, that helps a lot. It's more important to be accurate than to have a large volume of paper. Your approach to cost containment, do things make sense? Are you reducing where it makes sense? I think another aspect of trust and confidence is simply to remember it's not the school business official's money. I think it's very easy to be looking at everything and thinking that you have to bear the weight of the world on your shoulders and make all these decisions, but it's not your money. It's not my money. It's the public's money. I think a level of transparency, a lot of transparency goes a long way. And I think by successful committee work involving elected officials goes a long way, where they get to own a lot of the process, and they really have responsibility anyway. If you've issued bonds and never looked at the statements, it talks about the board president being the chief financial officer. It takes a board resolution to move any money, to authorize money. They really are responsible. It's not ours. So that's an aspect of it. I think knowing your community has a lot to do with building trust and confidence. Certainly, The parents of the students are key in this. How they feel about the community, their confidence level. Businesses in the community, are they supportive? Do they feel like they can function in the community? Are they being taxed out of the community? Are they supportive of the community? To have an awareness of what's going on around you. If the city that you live in, if you happen to be a city district, is having a large tax increase, they've just forecast, say, 8.5% increase, I think that's a factor. Those people are the same people who are going to pay your bills. There's a town tax going up. Collective bargaining agreements. It's certainly a factor in building trust. Bargaining units are always looking to each other to see how each bargaining unit has done. There's also the issue of comparable units that are not in your district. It's very typical to have CSEA bargaining units that may be part of a city or part of a town or part of the county, but are still view themselves as similar CSEA employees. So there's a lot of factors to consider in building trust and confidence, and those are really some thoughts on that topic.
Yeah, and I think that Kurt mentioned this several times, but that if you're a new business official or you've been there for quite a while, circumstances, boards change, superintendents change, and the culture changes. But one of the things that you have to keep a pulse and be monitoring is what is that culture that you're trying to deal with? Because when we talked about building the team and buy into a long-range approach to try to meet your goals, particularly from a financial standpoint, if you start to lose grasp on some of those types of things, that you're not paying attention maybe to a more vocal part of your community, whether it's the parents or some of the information that's so readily available about your communities that people know what's going on and bring them to the attention of other people, whether it's a board member or someone else. You really need to make sure that you're focusing on, at all times, what that culture of that community and that you're in, and what role you actually play. I don't think that there's any question whatsoever that within the level of your own districts, that as a business official, regardless of what your title is, that you have a key leadership role to play. But if you're not paying attention to these things, these teams break apart, trust and confidence goes away, and it's very easy to get off track and lose focus of some of the goals in the long-range plan that you probably worked very hard to try to put together and get people to buy into and understand that you do have the vision and have an understanding of how these things work together.
If I could make one other point under the collective bargaining settlements, I think we should never lose sight of the impact of our own employees on building trust and confidence. It's hard to overstate what an impact our own employees, our own teachers, our own bus drivers, our own custodians make on our community. Kids first see the bus driver in the morning. What they say can have an impact. They chat with parents. So I think we need to be mindful of the things that cause the community to come to the conclusions that they do, and be aware of them. This may be a little bit corny. I was trying to figure out a way to carve this thing up here, but I think one of the first questions is, with all we have to do, managing transportation, food service, insurance, collective bargaining, everything else, why does it make sense to do a long-range plan? I've got so many other things to do, I can't possibly get to it. And let's be realistic, it's going to be obsolete before I finish it. You just said everything's going to change in the next 2 weeks. I think it's a valid question. I'll try to answer that to some degree. I think the real answer is you want to provide the best academic programs you can for your students and your residents, and you want to provide as much stability as you can for your community. You can't do it all, but you at least want to try.
Yeah, and I think that the only other piece to add to that is what happens if you don't. There is enough consternation that's taking place as we start to look at what types of educational jobs are we going to be able to afford, turf battles with regard to which programs are going to survive the best, and kind of hunkering down in certain areas. If there is no plan, and if the Board of Education, the superintendent, and the community start looking to the business official for what is our solution, what is our vision for trying to make sure that we can meet these goals and deal with some of these issues. That's why you need to have a financial plan in this day and age. The years without change, where things have been fairly stable, many communities aren't going to be looking at stability the way they were. So, from a self-preservation mode, why do this? Well, the risks are too high if you don't do this, because you could be on an island on a lot of this information and have to put it together. So that's, I think, also an overriding reason why it's necessary.
Well, the stab I took at it did seem a bit like educational rhetoric, so I thought it warranted another question. What do we really mean by that? When there's significant financial instability, programs do get cut, sometimes big time. Students do suffer. And many times it takes years to rebuild those programs. They can be cut in one season, but you attempt to rebuild it, and it's a long uphill battle. Certainly when there's a lot of volatility, the stability of the Board of Education, and back to confidence, the confidence erodes because you're spiking, your taxes are up, then they're down, then they're one of our main goals is to afford the community as much stability as we can. I know when I first began in this position, there was a very strong group of people who were very concerned about taxes. There were also some bad situations that really perhaps were no one's fault. I know there was an equalization problem in one town, and the upshot of it was that there were a lot of teachers let go. At that time, it might have been something like 35, 37 teachers. And couldn't help but go back and look and say, could something different have been done? Could we have saved some of those teachers and some of those programs? And I personally think it could have. It could have. I wasn't there at the time. I know that people did the best they could. But certainly, I think we have to be looking at those options and how we can work through those issues. I'd like to talk a little bit about the difference between a budget and a forecast. I think we're all very familiar with our annual budgets. In our case, we do a multi-year forecast before the budget. Typically, we do a 3-year forecast. Sometimes we'll go longer than that. Last year we did. And as we all know, we go through individual budgetary accounts. We account for all the people, all the benefits, all the contractual expenses. Much more detailed analysis, much more reliable data, at least we hope, depending on the timing of things. But certainly, going back to the issues of trust and confidence, annual budget time is one of those times. And certainly, one of the things we didn't put on that slide that we should have was dealing with the press. And the annual budget time is a good time to be thinking about that. I was surprised when I came to my current district to find out that they had a practice of forecasting tax rates and household impacts and putting it in the brochure that went to the public to vote on. To me, that didn't seem to leave a lot of wiggle room to be wrong in your numbers. You may face similar things to that, and you may say, this is really crazy. In our case, we have a city and 5 towns. Really, there's about 19 variables on those tax rates. There's 6 taxable assessment numbers, there's 6 local exemption numbers, there's 6 equalization rates, and 1 tax levy. We control 1 number. Doesn't it seem a little unfair that we have to forecast this? Well, I was a new business official and no one wanted to hear anything about that. But certainly it pointed to a process that's worth discussing. How do you manage that type of uncertainty? I think part of the answer is that you can't just make up numbers in your office and hope they're going to work. What I found we had to do was really reach out to the assessors and really ask for the best information they could give us. Trending may work, it may not. It's been going up 2% a year. Well, you don't know that there's 6 condominium complexes and this percent's complete, they're that percent complete. You can't hide in a cave and think that you do a trend analysis and it's going to be accurate. Well, I found when I went down that road, a lot of red flags went up. We don't want to give you these numbers. The tax roll doesn't have to be finalized yet. We don't want to be bound by these numbers. That's understandable. And that pointed to making relationships with people that they feel comfortable at least sharing some level of information with you to put out a credible forecast.
Yeah, and what Kurt just mentioned that he walked into was a certain level of expectation that was provided in the budgetary documents that in a lot of cases would become unrealistic when you don't control a lot of the factors that go into that, from the time that you're putting that out prior to your budget vote to when you actually issue the tax bills. Leaves a lot of room for people to start complaining about, this is not what we thought we voted on types of questions. And that goes back to a couple of slides before about the credibility. And to be able to educate and discuss with the teams about what types of data is realistic to be able to provide, and create a common expectation about and an education process about what should be put out there. Because if you're providing too much data that you don't control, you have an issue with that trust and reliability part of it that's very difficult to overcome.
When we look at a multi-year forecast, we always do that before the budget. I was sharing with Steve, typically we'll do it in the October-November time frame. I can recall last year essentially doing it twice, coming out with a forecast in early November, and then the Board Finance Committee really wanting to revisit that forecast a second time before we went out with our major budget presentation. Forecasting can take a lot of different formats. I think the most important things is that it goes back to tracking changes. What are the big ticket items you need to be keeping track of? What's going to happen with the teacher's retirement system impact, the employee's retirement system impact? What's going on with the funding cliff? What's going on with the federal education jobs funding? If you want to bank it to the next year, where are they going to let you put it? Is it going to be part of the general fund and you have to account for it in your undesignated fund balance? Are they going to have some forethought and put it someplace else? Yeah, big ticket items that, and sometimes if people can just keep track of the 5 or 6 big things, that to some degree is a forecast. Because most people, things that are status quo are status quo. People are trying to manage what's going to change. Certainly use broader assumptions, trending expenditures, revenues, assessments, and equalization rates. I think everybody has a different way of doing things. I probably shouldn't admit this in a webinar. I've gone from trying to almost trend every account to doing it by function, doing it by object, even doing it bottom line. How much does the budget, how much the actual expenditures really go up? If I'm going to be honest, sometimes I've gotten better correlation when you go back and assess what you did, just looking at it bottom line. But perhaps the lesson in that is to go back and see when you're doing forecasting, if you're writing a novel or if it bears any resemblance to what really happens and where you're off. Speaking on a personal level, the fewer numbers I worked with, the less assumptions I built in to cover in case I made a mistake, and it ended up being more accurate with less numbers. But certainly, the multi-year forecast is very important and needs to be considered before you go out with your next budget. This has happened to me, perhaps it's happened to you, that you've worked diligently on a forecast and really no one was interested or paid attention to it. And maybe you're at a point in your career where you're spending a lot of hours, grinding a lot of numbers, and you're putting a document together that kind of sits on your shelf that no one's interested in. How do you improve that situation? I think largely you have to pass the baton. Other people have to own it. The superintendent, if you have the board finance committee or another committee, or other key administrators, every organization has some key administrators, usually on the curriculum side, program side, need to own it for it to be useful. Otherwise, I hope I'm not killing his quote, but I remember reading a Peter Drucker quote, you can never be efficient doing something that does not need to be done. If you do it and no one uses it, it falls in that camp, and it's desperately needed. It needs to be done.
Yeah, and the only thing I'll add to that is related to the comment that I made before is, it doesn't matter what your title is. If you're the business official in the school district, you need to be doing this work, and you need to be providing these forecasts. But part of it also is being part of building that team, is to accept some level of responsibility for trying to get buy-in to what you're doing, and trying to, not only getting others to own it, but being a part of that process so that can actually happen. Because again, I don't want to be too pessimistic about it, but if you continually just put these things out here, let them get put on the shelf, there may come a point in time where there's going to be a certain level of finger pointing as, well, we didn't know that. Well, I gave you the numbers. Well, when that stuff starts happening, there's going to be a problem. And so the encouragement here is to be part of the team building process so that it isn't an exercise of futility that gets stuck on the shelf. Because these tough questions about trying to maintain your programs, maintain your goals, are going to be emphasized over the next several years.
And if I could just add one thing to what Steve said, your title doesn't matter. I've been in this business a long time. I started the business through the civil service route. You're well aware that you can either be certified through SCD, which I ultimately was, but I started through civil service, as many people in our business do. Your title doesn't matter. You bring the same professional credentials to the position, and don't underestimate the value of those, especially in this economy, how important it is to be heard. Okay, so how do you get everybody to own it? I think that's That's an important question, because unless that happens, maybe nothing happens. What we've found to work is to really explain things in smaller settings. There's an aspect of that people feel comfortable, they feel safe enough to ask questions. Certainly, we never want to be in a position to make somebody feel feel foolish or feel embarrassed. That's not going to help anything. What we want to do is educate people, and we found small committee work helps in that regard. Certainly helps to have some longevity to the committee. We have a complex business, and it takes time to understand it. People come from all different backgrounds. We've come up with a finance background. Other people are coming in with an elementary education background. They're not in the same place. They need time to understand it. It needs to be something that's easily understood, something that's easily remembered, something that's important to them, and somehow or another connected to their real world, for them to walk out of it and have grasped it and run with it. I think it's very, very helpful for the school business official to be a good teacher. By that, I don't mean that you had to come up formally being trained as a teacher and have gone through the academic route. No, I mean somebody who can patiently explain things and help people to understand them in a very reasonable manner.
Yeah, and I think the ability to do that also adds to trust and credibility among the people that are working on these committees as well. If you can explain it in a way that means something to them, and rather is essentially believed to be just you throwing information out there that's important to you and not them, you can't build credibility on these teams as well.
Oops. Steve's better with the clicker here. Just to give an example, we did a major refinancing this year, very similar to refinancing your house because interest rates are better. It's meant to be humorous, but there's an element of truth to this. From a technical point of view, as a CPA, I could try to explain that first statement about the present value savings, what the assumed discount rate was, what the yield to maturity was, on, and have people gloss over, have no idea what I said, or simply say it generates enough money for us to finance 3 classrooms a year. People will remember that. They'll buy into wanting to do it. They can see the immediate application to what they're trying to accomplish. It's a crazy example, but the goal is that people understand it. How do you know that they understand it, or how do you know that they'll run with it? I think that's important. I found that when the committee understands it, that myself as a school business official doesn't have to push it anymore. Other people are advancing it. It almost reminds me of a snowblower. They tell me that good snowblowers have 2 stages to it. There's a first stage that lifts it and another one that throws it. I like the idea of being the first stage to get it to the committee level where they own it and they'll buy it and they run with it, because they'll have a lot more impact than you will as an individual or I will as an individual. Certainly, you can tell that they're starting to own it when they advocate the recommendations and insights that are in the plan. It's much better, from my perspective, to hear the superintendent explaining it to the cabinet, or hear the finance committee board members themselves explaining it to the other board members. That's becoming more and more a goal of mine, is to have the committee members carry the message back. It has much greater impact than it does if you have one voice that's always saying everything. So it's certainly some ways to look at it to see if they own it. I'd like to talk a little bit more about being a teacher. I think we've mentioned that board members and colleagues have very different financial backgrounds and levels of understanding. It's just a natural outgrowth of what they've done for their lives. By and large, it's been my experience that nothing's going to be very important to those players if they don't understand it and they don't find it relative to what they're really interested in. And they're not really interested in long-range planning. They're really interested in running their program, getting parents happy that the kids are now, they're back to a 3 instead of a 2, that they've got their race to the top application done. They're really not interested in long-range planning. They're interested in what helps them get the work done. I think, similar to a good teacher, what is effective for us, whether you have formal training as a teacher or not, is at some level just to listen and understand how much people are grasping about a conversation and an initial assessment, to try to talk in layman's terms to explain things, and simply listen again as those people talk and recount at perhaps a board meeting or some other session of what they took away from that meeting. My former superintendent used to have this saying, many different views of the bridge. He's right. If you're looking from underneath, if you're approaching the bridge, you're coming in from an airplane, it looks a lot different. And you can leave a meeting thinking you've done a stellar job explaining something, and then you hear somebody else recount what they took away from the meeting. It can be very eye-opening. This next bullet is not meant in any way to be derogatory, but I think it's true that adults are even more adept at covering up what they don't understand than children are. You can sit in a meeting and have everybody nodding there and thinking everybody's on top of their game, and then you have another discussion and you can't believe everybody went to the same meeting. I've found that simple illustrations can be very helpful. Visuals and graphs can be very effective. A picture can be worth 1,000 words. And again, I think it's important to reiterate that we always need to be respectful how we approach people. You're never going to build a team, or you're never going to get the support that's necessary if people feel like they've been intimidated or they look foolish because they don't understand things. I think that's key to this.
Yeah, and if you're in a small enough community, you never know who you're talking to.
Yeah.
And how politically connected they might be locally. So it's best, particularly when you're trying to build these teams and do this, that always keep that in mind. Is that someone who just seems to have a concern that you might be willing to brush off because you've only got a minute, might be somebody's brother-in-law who gets their ear later on, and that happens in communities all over the place. And unfortunately, that's one of the political considerations that you have and responsibilities that if you're in public education that we all have.
I thought I could share some examples. Different things will work for different people. Sometimes I found, my background, I have taught accounting at the college level as an adjunct, but sometimes a very simple illustration goes a long ways. A common question that I've always been asked is, why is the budget increase different than the tax increase? Or maybe another way of asking it might be, well, if state aid got frozen, how does it impact the tax increase so much? I don't understand this. How are you at double digits already? And sometimes a simple illustration like this, and I put millions, but it doesn't have to be millions. It could be dollars. You could start with an original budget that's $50 in expenditures or appropriations, and it basically comes from state aid or the tax levy. There are other little things out there, but for the argument of the illustration, you don't need it. If it goes up 5%, it went up 2.5, so your new budget is 52.5. Your state aid didn't move, so that's still 25, and now your tax levy is 27.5. Well, the budget increase was really only 5%. It just went up 2.5 on a 50 base. Your tax levy increase is now double that. because that 2.5 went on a much smaller base. So this is a simple illustration, but there's a leveraging effect of why the tax levy goes up, even though the expenditures are under control. And I think it also points to the need to get people to speak to a common vocabulary, that they understand the difference between a budget increase, a tax levy increase, a rate increase, because there's all types of confusion that happen like that, and people feeling that things were misrepresented or they didn't understand anything. You talked about a 5% increase. How come this is 10%? So certainly simple illustrations that help people to crystallize the concepts. They feel comfortable with them. Another illustration that folks in our community I put it in a presentation many years ago, and then people keep asking me to put it back in. I took it out a long time ago. I think we're all in the same boat. State aid keeps going down. Look, I don't know how it chose 1991, 92. I guess it was an easy year. I could find the information quickly that state aid was roughly half the budget. And then I have a next slide that shows where we are going into next year, that it's only 27% of the budget. That talks to people a lot more than a tabulated listing of showing what percentage it was each year, or to have an income statement that just has a percentage next to it and saying, gee, you see how this is going down. Sometimes people look at that and say, wow, that's really changed. They understand that pressure has moved, financial pressure has moved on to the tax levy, and that's not something necessarily the business official can control. But certainly a picture can be worth 1,000 words. Sometimes people want to know what's the tax level effort in your community compared to some other districts. That's where we choose to use true value tax rates. Sometimes a graph like that can be very helpful. Sometimes it cannot be helpful, and you may not want to use that graph, but it's simply an illustration. We talk about state aid and the essential underpinnings of the combined wealth ratio, or whatever the newer term is now. What do our assessed values, our value per pupil, look like? Are they compared to the state average? I've tried to explain the combined wealth ratio a couple times and found it very confusing, but simply to put up a graph, well, the light blue is the state, the dark blue is the school district, voila, people understood things that I was not successfully communicating before. Certainly, I'd like to give credit to these slides to Questar BOCES State Aid Planning Service. They actually put them together at our request. A similar type of thing for income per pupil, which would have an impact on your state aid. People understand what's really going on in your community and how it's impacting your state aid. They understand more clearly. They can connect the issues. Or something like a chart on assessment growth. The taxable assessments have a lot to do with how your actual tax rates are going to come out. You can talk about how much they're growing, how much they're not growing, but sometimes a visual to show at a point in time when the market is really changing, the economics of the community are changing, people understand. They understand that in itself is going to put a lot of pressure on tax rates that were not there before. I don't know how much time we have here if we're running out. I just put together some bullets on strategies that business officials can use to improve stability. Each one of these is probably a topic in and of itself. I think there's a typo on there. That the bullet that says tax stabilization reserve is really incorrect. That should be called a tax reduction reserve. But certainly, each one of these types of strategies can be used to help stabilize your impact to some degree. I think folks may be very aware of tax certiorari reserves. I think it's important to track data carefully. Do you want to respond to?
Each one of these?
I don't know. The
okay.
question, no.
Well, we did have a question which came is that, just to clarify, is that the webinar does run till 3:30, and we will have a question and answers section at the end, and we will get to as many questions either through the chat or through the call-in as we can, and then we can also respond to them after the fact as well to provide that. We have another question here is what is the true value tax rate?
Simply, it's to take the entire tax levy divided by the entire true value, not assessed value, the entire true value of the entire district. So you come up with one rate that's really somewhat, I would call it a comparative rate that's a measurement for the entire district. Where you have a number of municipalities, you're computing an apportionment, a part of the tax levy over their part of the tax base. And you typically end up with 6 different rates for each of the municipalities. True value, you'll get one rate for the entire district based on the hypothetical full value of your district. And we find that useful to compare to other communities.
Yeah, that's the point that I was going to make, is that after you apply, the equalization to get the true value, you have a single number, but it's more meaningful when you're trying to compare true value to true value across different school districts, as it is to try to compare a true value to whatever that particular assessing unit is. This is one of those things about the ability to be a teacher and answer these questions, because I don't know if there's anything that glazes people over more than trying to explain what an equalization rate is, and why it's necessary, and how it relates to your assessments and your tax bills. But the true value is after equalization, and it's to be compared really across different school districts.
Just to make a few comments, I think folks are familiar with the tax certiorari reserve. I think an important note is to keep careful records by year, what the petition was, what the cost impact was. One of the subtleties of that you may not come across until later on is that when you actually go to settle a tax claim, there are other players involved. You could have a public library, you could have a city. Some people may have set up reserves, some may have not. As a practical matter, if they haven't, people may want to settle the matter prospectively. That can actually then generate for you another revenue stream that in this economy is a welcome stream. So each one of these strategies can certainly be looked at in terms of ways to help manage your long-term financial future.
Yeah, and I would only add to that. And Kurt can agree or disagree with me on this. Is that reserves have to be part of a longer strategy of a management tool.
Yes.
How you deal with long-range planning.
Yeah.
That where districts have run into issues with using a particular reserve in a particular year rather than looking at reserves over the longer term, and to be able to provide some rationale, particularly with a lot of the audits that districts have gotten, as to why they're using reserves that they're using, and have a rationale rather than not using a long-range planning, not using reserves in a strategic way where you've got money going in and out of reserves, and you
agree
look
wholeheartedly.
at that, and that's where problems occur. So it's part of your long-term strategies of doing your financial plan.
Yeah, I think Steve's exactly right, and I think one way to assess that if you're trying to assess what kind of progress you're making with your long-term planning, is really to look at comparative balance sheets, especially the equity section or the reserve section over time, to get a sense of where you were, where you're going, and why you're going where you're going. So certainly couldn't agree more with that comment. In terms of formats for forecasting, I almost had a slide, I took it out, about learning school business administration from listening to James Taylor play guitar. When I was in college, I wanted to play guitar like James Taylor. I thought that was the greatest thing. And I found this book, I think the guy's name was Happy Traum, and he said the true mark of a professional is they can do something incredibly complex and make it seem very simple, very clean, clear, and simple. I think that's what we're up against. I think that we have incredibly complex work to do with these forecasts, but I have had the best success after all the complex work to produce a very simple product that people understand. A few things I think are important, certainly to garner agreement on the conceptual framework. How are we going to approach this goal? Are we going to reduce expenditures, cost containment? Are we going to use reserves? What percentage of the reserves? To document your assumptions. Certainly that gives you something to point back when the forecast when things are different than the forecast, you can say why they're different. But even more importantly, if you can get to a point where a committee is well groomed enough to do the assumptions as well, then it becomes a team effort. Also, I think using the format of your financial statements as a guide works pretty well. It brings continuity between your forecasting and your actuals. We've played with a number of formats, some more successful than others. What we're finding works best now is kind of a combination of an income statement with a balance sheet, and really looking at, we really caption it as a 3-year fund balance forecast. The important things I would note on that are really you need to be looking at your actual data. I think things can go awry when you're just trying to look at your budgetary data. In this illustration, and I'll explain it on the next slide, if this is actual data, in this case, we might have been budgeting in that we were going to use $4.5 million of our surplus. But if you look at the real expenditures, the real revenues, you find out that you're doing something different than what you budgeted. And I think that's a critical component of coming up with accurate fund balance forecasts. In this case, these are hypothetical numbers. Maybe you started out with an $8.5 million undesignated fund balance. You budgeted using up $4.5 million of that. But if you looked at your real operations are not using up all $4.5 million. There isn't that big a difference between your expenditures and your revenues. So there's really part of that that doesn't get used. And to keep track of that and add that back into your estimated fund balance when you're doing projections. This makes your life a lot easier when you come to do your property tax report card. And certainly when we've adopted a practice of now actually having our board finance committee review that property tax report card before it goes out, so people understand very clearly what the issues are, why we're reporting what we are, and feel very comfortable that everybody's on board with it before it goes out. Just a few parting thoughts before we questions and answers. Certainly, one thing that we would recommend in this economy is close work with the HR department, or you may be the HR department. I've been there. To know your certification areas of all your staff intimately, so you know how you can move around the pieces. I believe this next one very firmly. Do surgery with a scalpel, not a chainsaw. That you start hacking away at things, you can never put them back together. I would go with minimally invasive surgery and progress from there, because you can't reverse some things. Next one I found to be extremely critical is to make sure that people understand the difference between assumptions and reality. You may have some members who are a little bit more on the pessimistic side, and they don't think you're being negative enough in your assumptions, and you build models, and the rest of the team is thinking that the sky has fallen in that far already, and they're putting together riff lists and letting things percolate that really shouldn't be percolating at that point till you know what the reality is. Another recommendation is that financial planning is a year-round activity. Certiorari petitions come in at a certain time when the tax roll is finalized. That's a good time to revisit what the funding in your reserve should be, what you think you need to make provision for. State aid forecasting, taxable assessment data. When your assessments come in, that's a good time to re-up your tax assessment forecast for future negotiations. Contract settlements, as they settle, building them into your models. So I think we're running out of time, and
just a couple summary comments is, Kurt has done a terrific job going through some of the examples, and I think hitting the real highlights. And I just wanted to kind of come full circle on it, to again say that the reasons why we're trying to put such an emphasis on this process is because I think the practical reality is that as far as trying to maintain your goals in your educational program, things are going to get worse before they get better. And the school business official is going to be leaned on, and their ability to do the things that Kurt was talking about, to be able to communicate effectively, to build the team, to be an educator that helps to allow others to take ownership of this process, because if any of those pieces break apart, that's when you have the potential for rifts within school districts and cultures that take a long time, and Kurt mentioned this, to put back together once they fragmented. And as important as it is as far as the other members of the leadership team, a lot of people are going to be looking at the business officials for these plans and to say, where are we, and provide in a format that can be updated, communicated, and explained. And that's why we're trying to do these types of things. And we're encouraged that some people have decided that they wanted to spend a little time this afternoon to talk about it. And at this point, I don't have any other chat questions that have come up. But Matt, if you're with us, and if we can open up the phone lines to see if anybody wants to dial in and have any voice questions they want to ask us.
Yeah, absolutely. If anyone would like to talk to our presenters over the phone, all you have to do is hit 7#, and you'll come up on my screen as someone who's interested. If you'd want to go ahead and do that right now, we'll give you a minute to do so.
Let me ask you a question, Kurt, while we're waiting to see if anybody comes on the line. You've mentioned that you've been in several different school districts, held several different titles, and I presume that these districts kind of had their own cultures.
Oh, yes.
And that you adapted to.
Yes.
Was there any trends or anything that as you moved a little bit further into different district sizes, that things became either more or less difficult size relative, or don't you think that there really is that connection? Because we did mention the fact that it doesn't matter what your title is and what size you are, is that you have a certain level of responsibility here. But is there something that you noticed that, as we have some people here from a variety of different size school districts, that that they can be looking toward?
That's a good question. One observation I'll make is that I've sensed a preconceived notion that if somebody's been in a smaller district, people don't feel like they're qualified to be in a big, large district. I have found that not to be true. I've found that when you're in a small district, you have to do everything. You have to know everything pretty intimately because there's nobody to delegate it to. And I found that to be a very good training ground or preparation to be in a larger district where, honestly, you don't get to do a lot of things. After a while, you're not quite sure what your job is because you never really get to do anything. But at least you have a good understanding of what everybody's supposed to be doing and what needs to get done, and a sixth sense that something's not getting done because you always had the responsibility of doing it all yourself. I don't know if that answers it.
No, it does, and let me follow up on that question, because one of the things that you just alluded to was as you do have a larger district and you might have a larger administrative budget, you rely on more people to help you along the way. I would presume that what you're saying about building the team then includes all those folks as well.
Yes.
That they're part of this process and feel like they're part of the process. Because it can be one of those things, particularly if you're coming from a small to a large, that you're dealing more with a superintendent than you are as trying to build your own staff. And just if you wanted, is that something that you found as well?
Yes, it is. And I also think that it's a very practical application of trying to be the best teacher you can as you can get your own staff to handle things and be self-sufficient by teaching them. That goes a long way. You find yourself not doing as much and reviewing things more. It ends up in a better product because you can be looking at it without doing it.
Yeah, I mean, we talked a bit about building trust, and we talked about building the team of decision makers. But I think what you're saying here is that it's
your own business.
You have to have trust up and down that within that team as well. Yes. We have a question here that was submitted via chat. Martha Stevermer, I apologize if I got your name wrong, Martha, but I find explaining declining enrollment in terms of budgeting, in terms of a budget that does not decline. Any suggestion? Let me repeat that again. I find explaining declining enrollment in terms of a budget that does not decline. Talking about in terms of economics, you have marginal utilities and marginal costs on certain things.
Yes.
And simply, this came up a big part of when charter schools became part of it, is the ability to teach and explain that simply because we have 50 fewer students this year is that we can't eliminate one classroom in a third grade. And again, it's the ability to teach in a simple terms is how these costs are spread across your program and where you can find certain efficiencies and where you can't. That's my initial thought.
I agree. One way to approach it is the concept of fixed costs and variable costs. Mm-hmm. Certain costs of heating your plant, cleaning the snow, paying for the insurance, the gas for the buses, is going to be the same whether you have a few less students or not. Or if you looked at what it takes to run a district, the central office functions of superintendent curriculum, those costs are going to be there whether declining enrollment occurred or not, unless it was a very significant decline. And as Steve mentioned, declining enrollment doesn't always go the way you want it to. It isn't all in third grade, so you can get rid of a third grade section, or all in one advanced placement physics course. It's all over the place. It doesn't necessarily mean you can reduce sections.
Right, and and the ability to communicate that economic term is to give an example of where these enrollments advancements are happening in the number of classrooms, and to be able to graphically show something like that very, very quickly. We just held the leadership training for our academy, and one of the things that was discussed is a way to address difficult issues in a productive way is not to focus on the reason that we can't do something. Well, anytime you have to explain a reason why you can't do something, you always come back and give an explanation of why, but here is what we can do. So there's always a second piece of that. It's, we can't do this, but here is what we can do. So you're always moving the conversation forward rather than leaving things left at a negative. And that can be a piece of again, part of this trust, part of this building this process and this culture. Do we have anyone else, Matthew, that has anybody called in on the phone and wants to ask a live question? Well, it doesn't look like we do, and in fact, it is 3:30 now. So, like I said, we can keep this open for a few more minutes. You certainly know how to contact New York State ASBO if there's any further questions that come up as you've had a chance to kind of go back and reflect upon some of the thoughts you've heard here, or can go back and look at the PowerPoint presentation. You should be receiving a key where you can go onto the Institute part of our website, type in your key, and have access to the materials and do it that way. But by no means do we want to shut down a conversation where we can actually provide some additional thoughts over time. So with that, I am going to say farewell to you all. I'm going to officially thank Kurt again for doing this. And I didn't mention is that he's doing it on short notice. We had some problems with a previous presenter from National Association who's done this, so he's actually has filled in on short notice to work on this. So I wanted to acknowledge that and thank him for doing that. And again, if you have any other questions, please feel free to send the emails back to the association. So with that, I wish you a good afternoon,
have a great weekend,
and have a good weekend. All right, thank you very much.